When Eduardo Montero parked the car in front of the small countryside house, the silence felt almost heavy. The soft hum of the expensive engine clashed with the distant crowing of roosters and the squeak of an old wooden gate barely standing. It was the kind of contrast that hurt to watch, a man now surrounded by glass and concrete, returning to the place where he once learned what love and failure truly meant. 5 years. That was exactly how long it had been since he last walked through that gate. Back then, he had sworn never to return. But promises made out of pride don't last long. The place hadn't changed much. The faded paint, the crooked clothesline, the porch with worn-out planks, everything looked frozen in time. Except for one thing. There was a new silence there, thicker, almost hostile, as if the wind carried memories he had tried to bury. Eduardo stepped out of the car, straightened his fancy jacket and took a deep breath. In the city, that gesture meant confidence. Here, it looked like a weak disguise. Because in front of that door, money couldn't protect him. He climbed the 3 wooden steps slowly, knocked once. Nothing. Knocked again. This time, the door opened. Laura appeared. The face he had sworn to forget came back to haunt him. She was thinner, her hair tied up carelessly, hands marked by hard work, but her eyes were still the same, steady yet tired, alive yet wounded. She said nothing, just stared at him like someone facing a ghost she wished had stayed gone, and in that instant their entire past fit into a single second of silence. Eduardo tried to smile, but it faded before it could form. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice trembling. Laura hesitated. Her heart raced, not from longing, but from anger. "You've already entered my life enough," she replied coldly. The door began to close. He placed his hand there, stopping it. "Please, just 10 minutes. Then I'll leave for good." She stood still, staring at the man who once promised her the world, but left behind only debt, resentment, and absence. Up close, he looked the same, but the shine in his eyes was different. A mix of regret and fear. 10 minutes, she repeated, hiding her disgust. She opened the door just wide enough for him to step inside. The living room was small, smelling of soap and stale coffee. In the corner, a worn-out couch, a patched blanket on top. Nothing there matched the man in a suit. Eduardo looked around, throat tight. "Everything's the same," Laura crossed her arms. "Unlike you." He wanted to answer, but words wouldn't come. Time seemed to mock him. Every corner of that house reminded him of what he'd lost. Then light footsteps echoed down the hallway. A boy appeared, holding a notebook. He looked around 12. He stopped when he saw the visitor. Laura quickly glanced at her son, as if to shield him from a memory. "Go to your room, Gabriel." But the boy didn't move. He just asked, straight to the point, "Is he my father?" The question hit like a punch. Eduardo froze. Laura took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "Yes, but he's only here for a moment." The boy laughed bitterly, too mature a sound for his age. "For a moment, just like when he left," and he walked away, slamming the door. Eduardo closed his eyes. For a second he seemed smaller, not the millionaire from magazine covers, but a man who had failed where money meant nothing. Laura watched him in silence. "Now, do you understand the damage you caused?" He nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I came to make it right." She let out a bitter laugh. "Fix what, Eduardo? The childhood you stole, the nights he cried for you, or the dignity I lost trying to pay the bills while your name shone in business columns?" He stayed silent. Every word she spoke was a broken mirror. Outside, the wind shook the trees, and a dog barked in the distance. There was a strange calm, the kind that comes before a storm. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," he finally said. "Then what do you want?" "To hear one word. Just a yes." "Yes to what?" "So I can help, without you thinking it's pity." Laura stood slowly, moved closer, and spoke quietly. "You don't help, Eduardo. You invade. Even when you try to do good, you hurt." The air felt dense, almost solid. He knew he deserved every word, yet somewhere inside, a part of him still believed he could change how this story ended. The wall clock showed 8:20 a.m., 10 minutes. The time he'd asked for was almost gone. But what he didn't know was that this visit wouldn't end there, because something much bigger and completely unexpected was about to happen. Gabriel's door slammed, and the echo lingered between the three of them. Laura took a deep breath, like someone gathering shards with care, and sat down at the kitchen chair. Eduardo remained standing, awkward, hand resting on the couch's back. The house felt too small for everything that needed to be said. "You want to listen?" she asked flatly. "Then sit down and don't interrupt." He obeyed. The buckle of his belt made a faint sound against the chair. Laura lifted her eyes to the window. Outside, the yard showed a clothesline full of small clothes and kitchen towels. Once, that same scene had been the promise of a life being built. "The first time you called me my home," she began, "was in that tiny apartment near the bus station. It used to leak when it rained, remember? We had a little two-burner stove and a mattress on the floor, and you painted a blue stripe on the wall with cheap paint because you said every empire starts with a color." She gave a short smile, not quite happy. "I believed it, because you talked like someone who could see all the way to the end of the street, and I, barely in my 20s, really wanted someone to see far for both of us." Eduardo lowered his eyes. He remembered the can of paint, her hand stained blue, the quiet song playing on a borrowed phone. He remembered how she slept curled up inside his hoodie, and how he promised that was only the beginning. "It was," he tried to say, but Laura raised her hand, and he fell silent. "Then you got the warehouse, small, rented, but it was your kingdom. I remember your first sale. You came home with a smile so wide it barely fit through the door. You dropped the money on the table, counted it 3 times, and hugged me like you'd just found a treasure map. I made pasta with sardines, and we ate standing up, laughing about everything. That was a good day." She pressed the empty glass to her lips, as if she was sipping on memories. But the good days started coming with a shadow. Then came the rush. The rush brought loans. The loan brought a bank into our lives. And with the bank came a man in a suit who spoke softly and smiled less. Eduardo gripped his knee. He remembered his shaky signature on the contract, the stamp, the manager's shiny watch. "You called it leverage. I called it too much risk. We argued on my dad's wooden porch. He overheard us. He said, 'Don't bite off more than you can chew.' You laughed and said legs grow when we walk. And me, foolishly, I wanted to believe in the poetry of your pride." Laura stood up, went to the stove, and turned off a burner that wasn't even on, a habit of someone who always checks. "When the big supplier bailed, you went pale. You didn't tell me right away. I found out through a phone call, someone demanding payment. I can still hear your voice trying to sound calm. 'I'll fix it in 5 days.' But 5 turned into 15. The checks bounced. The rent fell behind. The water got cut. And your eyes stopped seeing me." He lifted his head, wounded. "Not because you didn't love us," she went on softly, "but because you started loving more the idea of not failing." A heavy silence landed on the table. Eduardo ran his fingers over the wood, as if he needed the texture to stay grounded. "The night of the medicine," Laura said, and the air shifted. "Gabriel had a fever in the middle of the night. I went to the pharmacy holding him, just wearing a sweatshirt and slippers. 3 in the morning. You stayed at the warehouse trying to make a deal on WhatsApp with someone who swore they could save the production. I tried the card. Declined. Tried again. Declined. The clerk, feeling sorry, said, 'Try debit.' Declined. The line behind me started staring. A woman whispered, 'My God.' I asked if I could pay later. He said no. I walked out with a free sample, and tears I didn't have time to wipe because Gabriel was shaking on my shoulder." Eduardo closed his eyes for a moment too long. The knot in his chest came with a metallic taste. "I came back home, gave him a warm bath. His fever went down. When the sun came up, I went looking for you, found you at the warehouse with cold coffee and a tired face. I told you about the card. You slammed your hand on the table and said, 'That's what a man endures when he wants to grow.' And I said, 'That's what a woman endures when she has no choice.' You looked at me like I had betrayed you with reality. The sentence hung in the air, sharp. The next week, the bailiff knocked on the gate. Gabriel watched while a stranger made a list of our things. The old radio your father gave you went on the list. The crib went on the list. The man kept writing without ever looking up. You didn't say a word. I signed the papers. And when the man left, you said, "I'll fix it." Then you walked out. I waited for you, dinner on the stove, until 11 that night. You never came back. She breathed in deeply, controlled. The next day, you texted me, "I need space." 2 days later, another, "We should stop." 3 weeks after that, your name appeared in the business columns. An investor had bet on one of your ideas. Your photo, smiling with a fancy quote beneath it. I read it holding Gabriel in my arms, trying to understand how the space you needed came with glass walls and a skyline view. Eduardo clenched his hands. Invisible chains tightened around his wrists. "It wasn't that simple," he said in a shallow breath. "I didn't walk in through the front door. I was dragged down the hallway until I learned how to look like someone who belonged there. They humiliated me, laughed at my shoes. I turned into a machine that said, 'It's fine.'" "I believe you," Laura replied honestly. "But the problem is, you became a machine that said, 'It's fine' to everyone else, while leaving an 'I'm not fine' at home." She walked to the shelf, took a shoebox, and placed it on the table. Inside were old photos, Eduardo holding a sander, Laura pregnant in a floral dress, the crooked warehouse sign, and on the lid, a crumpled note, "I'll come back when it makes sense." It was his handwriting. "I kept this because for a long time I thought it was my fault too," Laura said. "That if I had believed in you a little more, you would have stayed. That if I had stayed quiet at the wrong moments, you would have loved me the right way. It took a while, but I learned that believing in you didn't mean losing myself." She closed the box. "When Gabriel asked where you were, I said, 'Working.' When he asked why you never came to his birthday, I'd say, 'Busy.' One day he answered, 'Then I'll be busy on Father's Day too.' I laughed in front of him so I wouldn't cry. And that night, I cried alone." Eduardo bit the inside of his cheek. The urge to explain himself came like a wave, but he held it back, just like he'd promised. "The last time you came here before today," Laura continued, "was when the news about your second round of investment came out. You showed up in a rented car, wearing expensive cologne. You had a watch worth 2 months of groceries. I made coffee. You said you were going to fix everything. I asked how. You said, 'Trust me.' I said, 'Show me.' You got angry. We argued. Your last words were, 'I can't fail again.' Mine were, 'You already failed where it mattered most.'" She lifted her eyes, this time steady. "And now you're here, 5 years later, with that same watch and a different face, saying you want to help. I don't want charity, Eduardo. I want you to understand that when a man leaves, the house learns how to live without him. And this house learned." From Gabriel's room came the sound of a page turning. Eduardo followed the noise with his eyes, but didn't move. His body felt tied to the chair. "I came because—" he started, then stopped. No rehearsed sentence seemed to fit. "I came because, for the first time in years, I earned something big and felt a hole even bigger than that. I went to see my father at the cemetery, spoke out loud and hated the sound of my own voice. He always used to say, 'The bill always comes.' Well, it came. I looked around and saw only glass, metal, and people who call me by my title. I wanted to see you two, and I realized I don't know how to walk through this door anymore without breaking something." Laura stayed silent for a few seconds. The clock hit 8:29. On the stove, the kettle let out a faint whistle. She got up, turned it off, poured 2 cups, and pushed one toward him. "You've got 2 minutes left from your 10, she said without sarcasm. "Use them well." Eduardo held the cup but didn't drink. He looked at the box of photos, then at the hallway, and decided that for once he wouldn't say he'd fix it. He only asked, "What did I break that can still be fixed without breaking again?" Laura leaned back in the chair, surprised by the question. She thought of everything: the bills, the roof, the medicine, the school, the dentist, the pride. She didn't answer. Instead, she nodded toward the bedroom door. He doesn't call you Dad. Start there, no promises, no card, no pretty speeches. The word card cut through Eduardo like a flashback. The ATM screen, transaction denied, sweaty hands, the pharmacy clerk staring at Laura that night. He nodded. Okay, he said simply. Gabriel opened his door and stepped into the hallway, holding his notebook tight against his chest. The boy looked at the man sitting at the table. Laura froze. Eduardo stood up quietly. As if any sudden move might scare away a bird, he stopped 2 steps away. I'll be outside, he said softly to the boy. If you want to talk, I'll be planting a guava seedling that was left from your grandpa's yard. I'm terrible with plants. Maybe you can do better. Gabriel didn't reply. He looked at his mother. Laura gave no sign. The boy closed his notebook and slowly slipped on his sandals. Eduardo went out to the yard, picked up an old trowel and dug into the dirt. His clean hands turned dark. The water from the bucket turned to mud. He stayed there, ridiculous and dignified at once, waiting without asking for anything. Laura watched from the window. There was no triumph in that scene. There was effort. And for the first time, that effort didn't come wrapped in promises. It was just a man working the soil, asking permission to exist where he'd once exiled himself. From the doorway, Gabriel appeared. He stepped down the stairs and stopped 2 meters away. Eduardo didn't look up. He just asked, without turning, "Do you know the right distance between 2 saplings so they can grow without fighting for space?" Gabriel hesitated, then answered, "About 1.5 meters. "Show me with your steps, then," Eduardo said. The boy measured. 1, 2 steps. The soil gave way beneath his sandals. Laura, still at the window, let her shoulders drop. The past was all there, but for the first time, it wasn't an anchor. It was ground, and ground, when cared for, grows again. The sun had already risen, casting a golden glow over the yard. Eduardo was still kneeling beside the small guava plant, his hands covered in soil. Every movement was slow, almost ritual, as if digging that hole meant uncovering what he'd buried inside himself. From the porch, Laura watched without interrupting. The scene was quiet, yet full of something she couldn't quite name. It was strange to see that man, who once spoke of profits and deals, now working the earth like a farmer with nowhere else to be. Then light footsteps broke the silence. Gabriel appeared again, holding the same notebook as before. His face was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and old hurt. He stopped a few feet from his father, who pretended to be too focused on the plant to notice. "The water's there, in the bucket," the boy said flatly. Eduardo looked up, surprised. "Thanks." He picked up the bucket and poured it gently over the seedling. The soil darkened, and the damp scent filled the air. "You know," he began, trying to break the ice, "when I was your age, my father made me plant a tree every time I messed up." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Then you must have a forest." The reply came quick, sharp. Eduardo swallowed the laugh that came mixed with pain. "Yeah," he muttered. "Maybe that's why I decided to start today." The boy looked at the sapling. "What kind is it?" "Guava." "Do you know how to take care of it?" "Not yet." "Then it's gonna die." Eduardo nodded. "Maybe, but it might not if someone who knows better helps me out." Gabriel stared at him for a few seconds, studying him. Then, without saying a word, he grabbed the bucket, filled it again at the faucet, and came back. He poured a bit of water and pressed the dirt with his foot. "It's too deep," he said. "It needs to breathe." "Then show me how to do it right." The boy crouched down and silently began fixing the soil. Eduardo just watched. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Father and son side by side, no big words, just small gestures. Laura watched from inside the house, her heart split between relief and fear. She knew her son wouldn't forgive easily. She knew the man in front of him still carried the same ghosts. But for the first time, the silence between them wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. "You don't look like a millionaire," the boy said, breaking the moment. Eduardo looked up, surprised. "What does a millionaire look like?" "I don't know. Just thought." Gabriel glanced at his mud-covered hands. "Rich people didn't get their hands dirty." Eduardo smiled faintly. "That's the problem. When we stop getting our hands dirty, we start dirtying our hearts. The boy stayed quiet, thoughtful. After a few seconds, he asked, "Why did you leave?" The question came blunt but real. Eduardo took a while to answer. "Because I thought if I stayed, I'd keep messing up, and if I left, I could fix everything." "Did you?" Gabriel shot back. "No, I just broke more." The boy lowered his eyes, fiddling with the dirt. "Mom cried every Sunday. I counted 52 times that first year." Eduardo took a deep breath, the sound heavy. "I deserve to hear that." Gabriel stood, wiped his hands on his shorts and stepped back. "You don't need to pretend to be a dad now." His voice shook. "It's clear you're trying, but you weren't here." Eduardo stood too, eyes down. "I'm not trying to pretend, Gabriel. I just want to be here, even if it takes time for you to believe that." The boy hugged his notebook against his chest. "And if I don't believe it, I'll stay anyway." A long silence filled the yard. Gabriel looked one last time at the newly planted tree and said before heading inside, "It's gonna need sunlight. Leave the window open." When he disappeared through the door, Eduardo sat on the porch steps. The sound of the wind mixed with the rustling leaves like a soft reply. Laura appeared a moment later, a rag in her hands. "He talked to you," she said quietly. "He did," Eduardo replied. "And it hurt more than I thought it would." She gave a half smile. "That's a good sign. The ones who've gone numb don't feel pain anymore." Eduardo stared at the ground. "He said I don't look like a millionaire." "And you don't," Laura said, crossing her arms. "Here, what counts isn't the car in the garage. It's what's left when the engine stops." He laughed softly, almost shyly. "Guess I'm still in debt here." Laura studied him for a moment. "What did you really come for, Eduardo?" she finally asked. "Because forgiveness doesn't fit in 10 minutes. I came to give something back," he said, looking at the yard. "A piece of myself, and a bit of what I took." Her gaze softened, though her tone stayed steady. "Then start by staying, but not out of guilt, and not out of pity. Stay to see if you can still grow something alive." He nodded. "And if I ruin it again?" "Then we pull it out and plant another one," Laura said, turning away. "Just don't run this time." When she went inside, Eduardo was alone again. He looked toward the horizon and noticed the sky changing colors. The small guava tree bent lightly in the wind, fragile but alive. It was a beginning, and for the first time in 5 years, he didn't want to be anywhere else. From the window, Gabriel watched in silence, and seeing his father sit on the ground, leaning against the wall like a man finally accepting his own guilt, the boy opened his notebook and wrote just one line. "I think he wants to learn how to stay." It wasn't much, but for a broken story, a little was already a lot. The next morning came grey. The scent of damp soil still hung in the air, and the small guava sapling planted the day before stood firm, drops of dew sliding down its new leaves. Eduardo woke early before sunrise. He'd slept in the car, slumped against the seat, too ashamed to ask for a place inside the house. The creak of the gate woke him. Laura stepped out wearing a folded apron and a worn-out bag over her shoulder. She walked briskly, not looking back. He watched from a distance, trying to guess where she was going so early. He grabbed his jacket, waited a few minutes, then decided to follow, not out of suspicion, but out of guilt and curiosity. The dirt road led to the small village center. A few shops were just opening, a little market, a bakery, a butcher shop with a faded sign. Laura went into the market, greeting the cashier with a quick nod. Eduardo stood across the street, watching through the fogged window. Then he saw something that tightened his chest. Laura slipped on a light blue uniform with the market's logo stitched above the pocket. She grabbed a bucket and a rag and started wiping the floor near the checkout lanes. The same woman he once called the queen of the house was now scrubbing tiles while customers pushed their carts over the wet floor. No one noticed her. No one said, "Thank you." Eduardo froze. The expensive suit he wore suddenly felt like a ridiculous disguise in front of that scene. He felt ashamed, not of her, but of himself, because the money he had now came from the same ambition that had stripped her of her dignity. A customer dropped a bag of rice on the floor and looked at Laura like she didn't exist. She crouched, picked it up, and smiled, even tired. The manager appeared wearing the face of someone who never learned what respect meant. "Hurry up, Laura! This isn't a charity. If you want to talk, talk while you mop," the man barked, his ID badge hanging crooked on his chest. Eduardo clenched his fists. Every word from that manager hit like a punch. Laura only bowed her head and kept cleaning, silent. His blood boiled. He wanted to walk in, shout, tell everyone who he was. He wanted to tear the floor apart and pull her out of there himself. But something inside whispered, "Don't ruin what she's built in silence." And he understood. That woman didn't need a savior. She needed respect. He went back to the car, but his blank stare betrayed him. He leaned his forehead against the steering wheel and sat there, trying to figure out what to do. For the rest of the morning, he watched from afar. He saw Laura help an old lady with her groceries, comfort a new employee who was crying, and still smile when the manager yelled again. There was strength in that smile, the kind of strength he never had. And right there, in that dusty parking lot, Eduardo made a quiet decision. He wouldn't try to buy forgiveness. He'd do something greater, something invisible, but fair. He pulled out his phone and called Marcelo, his lawyer and closest friend. "Marcelo, I need you to find an architect and an engineer I can trust." "For what?" "I want to renovate a market." "A market? What? Did you turn into a philanthropist now?" "Let's just say I'm paying off an old debt." Marcelo laughed on the other end. "And whose company name goes on this?" Eduardo thought for a moment. "Recomeço Inc., he said, "and I don't want the name Montero anywhere on it." In the days that followed, Eduardo began visiting the market in disguise. He'd go in wearing a cap and sunglasses, buy small things, and watch Laura from a distance. He learned her schedule, when she took her coffee break, when she was alone stacking shelves. He saw her share her last cheese bread with a younger co-worker. He saw her skip lunch to help unload the delivery truck. Every small gesture was a reminder of what he had lost and of what he could still rebuild inside himself. One afternoon, Laura slipped on a puddle of detergent and fell, scattering products across the floor. The manager, instead of helping, yelled, "I should have fired you already. You're only here because you're cheap." The whole store went silent. Eduardo took a step forward, but held himself back. Laura stood, wiped her hands, and replied firmly, "I'm here because I do my job right. And that's what keeps this place open, sir." For a moment, the manager was speechless. The customers stared. And Eduardo felt something new, pride. Not the kind born from ego, but the kind that comes from seeing courage where there used to be pain. That night, he wrote on a piece of paper, "It's not charity, it's delayed justice." And he began to build a plan. The market would be renovated. New equipment, new ventilation system, fresh paint. But hidden in the contract was a small clause. Employee Laura Ferreira must be promoted to general manager once the project was complete. No one would know he was behind it, not her, not the manager. While arranging everything, Eduardo found himself once again looking toward the small house at the end of the road. He saw the bedroom light on. He imagined Laura sewing uniforms or helping Gabriel with homework. He thought about knocking on the door and telling her everything, but he knew that would destroy the fragile peace she had built. So he decided to stay in the shadows. He would do everything quietly. The same silence he once used to run away, he would now use to make things right. Over the next few weeks, trucks began arriving at the market. Employees whispered about the mysterious investor funding the renovation. The manager paced nervously, trying to find out who it was, but nobody knew the name. And Laura, unaware, kept doing her job, sweeping the floor between scaffolds and paint cans. Until one day, when she arrived for her shift, she noticed something different. The counter she always cleaned was being replaced with a new one, and on the glass front there was a big banner, "Coming soon, New Hope Market, under new management." Laura read it and smiled without knowing why. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe life was changing. Across the street, inside his car, Eduardo watched with a quiet smile of his own, helping without being seen, fixing without showing off. That was the first real lesson in humility that wealth had ever taught him. But fate, as always, doesn't let peace last for long, because right at that moment, the manager, while signing the renovation papers, noticed something small at the bottom of the page, a name he instantly recognized. Signature: Eduardo Montero, representative of Recomeço Inc. His eyes filled with malice, and from that moment, the secret Eduardo had tried so hard to protect was about to explode. The manager, Sergio, stood frozen in front of the contract, a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. The name he read on the signature made his eyes widen. Eduardo Montero. That last name wasn't common. He remembered a news report he'd seen months earlier on the local channel. Businessman Eduardo Montero expands investments in community markets. He looked back at the paper, and a crooked smile spread across his face. "So you're the Good Samaritan, huh?" he muttered, folding the contract and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The cigarette fell, still burning, and scorched the floor. The next morning, Eduardo arrived early at the makeshift construction site. The workers were already at it, and he was talking with the architect about the new shelving and the wider layout. Everything was moving quietly, just as he wanted. But while he was checking the supply list, he felt a presence behind him. "Funny," Sergio said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "seeing a man as busy as you, taking care of a tiny neighborhood market. Almost poetic." Eduardo turned slowly. The cynical grin on the manager's face said it all. That look wasn't curiosity. It was someone holding a weapon you couldn't see. "I don't think we've met," Sergio went on. "I'm the manager here." "Well, for now." Eduardo stayed composed. "Pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure's mine," Sergio replied, smirking, "especially when pleasure comes with profit." The only sound between them was a hammer hitting a wall somewhere in the background. Sergio stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know who you are, Montero. I know you're the ex-husband of employee Laura Ferreira." Eduardo froze. His pulse quickened, but his face stayed calm. "And what exactly does that change?" "Everything," the manager said. "Because I could end this little show you've set up here." Eduardo crossed his arms. "What do you want?" Sergio chuckled, blowing smoke to the side. "I want a cut. 10% of the renovation budget. Call it a silence fee." Eduardo didn't move. "And if I refuse?" "Oh, that's easy." Sergio flicked the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his shoe. "Then I tell her." For a second, Eduardo felt the ground disappear beneath him. The fear wasn't about losing money. It was about destroying the small seed of trust beginning to grow in Laura. "You really think she'd stay here if she found out her millionaire ex-husband was funding everything?" Sergio pressed, stepping closer. "I bet she'd walk away. And who could blame her?" Eduardo took a slow, steady breath, forcing himself not to react. He couldn't act on anger. "Give me some time to think." "Don't take too long," Sergio said. "I want your answer by 8 tomorrow." The manager turned and walked off, satisfied. Eduardo stood there staring at the dust swirling in the sunlight, wondering how to fix a world that seemed determined to keep breaking. Later, sitting inside his car, he called his lawyer. "Marcelo, I need the name Recomeço Inc. changed immediately." "What happened?" "Some idiot found out everything. He's trying to blackmail me." "You want me to handle it legally?" "No. This needs to stay off the record. No one can know it's me." He hung up and leaned his head against the steering wheel. The feeling of helplessness ate at him. No matter how much money he had, there were things that couldn't be fixed with a check, only with integrity. He looked out the window at the market. Inside, Laura was organizing shelves, unaware of the storm forming around her. Her apron had a small paint stain on the corner, her hair loosely tied back, and yet something about her radiated dignity. That image kept him steady. He wouldn't let anyone use her name as currency. That night, Eduardo went to the market after hours. The place was empty. In the small office, he found Sergio counting money at the desk. "You're persistent," the manager said without looking up. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Eduardo walked in, shut the door, and placed an envelope on the table. Sergio opened it eagerly, but instead of cash, there was only a single sheet of paper. It was a resignation letter, already signed by him. The manager laughed out loud. "So that's how you want to play?" "That's how I want this to end," Eduardo said, stepping forward. "You're fired. The renovation contract is now under my direct supervision." Sergio slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do that." "I can, and I already did." Eduardo pointed to another document. "That's the audit report I sent this morning to the network owner, with evidence of your scams and overcharges." The color drained from Sergio's face. "How did you—" "I've wasted too much of my life repeating mistakes," Eduardo interrupted. "I'm not doing it again." He leaned closer, speaking calmly but firmly. "If you even think about hurting Laura, I'll personally make sure your name and your face are in every newspaper in this city." Sergio said nothing, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Eduardo grabbed the envelope and walked out without looking back. The next day, Laura arrived at work to find the market buzzing with movement. Workers were taking down old shelves, painters were up on ladders, and a new notice board read, "Temporary management under new coordination." She looked around for Sergio, but one of the employees said, "The old boss got transferred. Now the investor's running things." Laura felt confused, but also relieved. Sergio had been everyone's nightmare. The atmosphere in the place felt different. And when the new supervisor handed out the fresh uniforms, she noticed something curious. Embroidered on the pocket was the logo RM, Recomeso Mercantil. Laura smiled. "Nice name," she said. "Recomeso." "Yeah," her co-worker replied. "Looks like someone wants to give this place a second chance." She went back to work with a lighter heart, unaware that the second chance wasn't just for the market. It was for her, for Gabriel, and for Eduardo. That afternoon, Eduardo watched from a distance, sitting inside his car. The renovations were nearly done, the storefront was changing, and for the first time in years, he felt he was finally doing something right, without needing anyone to see it. But fate still had surprises waiting. As he stared at the reflection in the glass window, he saw a shadow approaching. It was Laura, her apron stained with paint, walking toward the car. His stomach dropped. She stopped right beside the window, and not knowing he was inside, spoke softly to herself. "I don't know who's behind all this, but thank you." Eduardo didn't move. His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. He turned on the engine, and the sound of the car blended with the hammering in the background. As he drove away, he whispered, "It's not over yet." And it truly wasn't, because fate, stubborn as ever, was about to test everything again. The following weeks flew by. The market looked almost unrecognizable. New walls, modern shelves, bright white lights replacing the old yellow bulbs. Everything seemed to be reborn. But the more the place flourished, the greater the risk that the secret would surface. Eduardo made quiet visits, always at night, checking progress with the architect and accountant. No one knew his real name. Everyone simply called him Mr. Recomeso, and he liked that. It felt cleansing, as if anonymity allowed him to do good without the weight of who he used to be. But the world always finds a way to test those who try to change. That Friday morning, Laura arrived early at work. She carried a small cake wrapped in a kitchen towel. "It's to celebrate the end of the renovation," she said, smiling to a co-worker. She looked lighter. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, her hair neatly tied, and the once tired gaze now carried a quiet spark. Eduardo, watching from the sidewalk, felt proud. Everything had been worth it, until a cold voice shattered the balance. "What a coincidence seeing you here, Montero." It was Sergio. He reappeared like a ghost, wearing that same poisonous smile. This time he had a new badge, regional consultant, and the same arrogant stride of a man who thought he was untouchable. Eduardo took a deep breath. "You shouldn't be here, and you should learn to cover your tracks better." The former manager pulled an envelope from his pocket. Inside were printed copies of emails exchanged between Eduardo and the architect. full of details about the project and its funding. Sergio waved the envelope like a trophy. If this lands in the right hands, your little show falls apart. What do you want this time? Eduardo asked, exhausted. Nothing, Sergio said with a grin. Just a front row seat for when she finds out. He stepped closer. In fact, I think that moment's about to happen. He gestured subtly toward the market's entrance. Eduardo turned his head. Laura was walking toward them, apron clean, cake in hand. His heart pounded. Leave, Sergio. His tone was low but steady. Relax, Sergio said. I'm just here to enjoy the reunion. Before Eduardo could move, Laura was already there. Her eyes widened as she saw him standing beside her former boss. What are you doing here, Eduardo? She asked quietly. Her voice carried enough weight to silence the noise around them. Some employees glanced over, pretending to keep working. Eduardo opened his mouth to explain, but Sergio spoke first. Him? The manager said with mock surprise. Oh, he's the real investor behind all this. The guardian angel of the market. The man who paid for every brick of this renovation. Laura froze. The silence that followed was thunderous. She looked at Eduardo, searching his eyes for denial, for anything to tell her it wasn't true. But he only lowered his head. Is it true? She asked, her voice trembling. Laura, let me explain. So it's true. She took a step back, her face turning pale. You were buying my life. Eduardo reached out a hand. No, I was just trying to make things right. Make things right? Her voice rose. What shame were you trying to fix? The abandonment? What you did isn't redemption, it's pity. The entire market went still. The employees pretended to keep working, but every eye was on them. Sergio leaned casually against a post, arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle. Laura slammed the cake onto the counter. The towel slipped off, and the cake collapsed onto the floor. She didn't care. Tears streamed down her face, unchecked. You think you're God, Eduardo? You think you can rewrite people's lives? I just wanted to give back what was yours. What was mine, she shouted, was the right to choose, and you took that away again. Eduardo felt his face burn. I didn't do it out of pride. You did it out of guilt, and guilt doesn't heal anything. Her words echoed like a verdict. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His chest tightened. The air felt heavy. Laura turned to leave, but glanced once at Sergio. And you, she said sharply, should be ashamed to still walk among decent people. Sergio laughed, dripping with sarcasm. Decent people, I just told the truth. Truth without empathy is cruelty, Laura replied coldly. Then she walked away, eyes glistening, leaving silence behind. Eduardo stood frozen, staring at the crumbs of cake scattered on the floor. It felt like each piece was a fragment of what he'd tried to rebuild, now shattered all over again. Hours later, the market was empty. Eduardo was still there, sitting alone on one of the darkened checkout counters. The dim lights cast long shadows across the floor. He stared at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. You took away my right to choose. Sergio was gone, probably pleased with the chaos he'd caused. But the damage was done. The trust Eduardo had worked so hard to plant had been torn out by the roots. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcelo. All set. Sergio signed the termination. He's out. No control over the project anymore. Eduardo typed a short reply. Too late. He turned off the phone and looked toward the market's glass front. Outside, a soft rain had begun to fall, forming reflections on the wet asphalt. He stepped into the drizzle without an umbrella, letting the drops wash over his face, along with the bitter taste of failure. As he neared his car, he heard a soft sound, laughter from the side street. It was Laura, walking under an umbrella with Gabriel. She saw him but didn't look away. She just passed in silence, her son beside her. Eduardo wanted to say something, anything, but the boy looked straight at him and said, You promised you wouldn't hurt her again. Eduardo's chest tightened. He tried to answer, but no words came. The sound of the rain drowned everything else. Laura and Gabriel kept walking down the road until the fog swallowed them, and Eduardo stayed there, soaked to the bone, and even emptier inside. That night, alone in the small hotel room where he'd been staying, Eduardo opened his laptop and wrote a short letter. The font was plain, the words simple. I failed again. I tried to fix her life without asking permission to enter it. Maybe the truest act of love is accepting that some stories don't ask to be resumed, only respected. Tomorrow I'll leave. But I'll still try to leave something good behind, even if she never knows it was me. He saved the file, closed the computer, and stared at the ceiling. He didn't cry. He didn't sleep. He just waited for dawn, with the quiet pain of someone burying a part of himself, hoping something new might grow. And fate, silent as always, was already preparing its next twist, the one that would finally reveal the gesture capable of changing everything. Saturday morning came cold, the air still heavy from the night's rain. In Laura's small house, the smell of coffee mixed with the faint sound of coughing from Gabriel's room. She walked in, a towel in hand. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, placing her palm on his forehead. His skin was burning and too hot. "Just a cold," he mumbled, eyes half closed. But a mother's instinct knew better. It wasn't just a cold. Within hours, the fever spiked, his body trembled, and his breathing grew shallow. Laura tried calling the clinic, but the lines were busy. Panic began to tighten around her chest. She grabbed her phone and, without thinking twice, ran to the city hospital. Her hurried footsteps echoed through the reception hall. Gabriel in her arms, pale and drenched in sweat. "Please, he needs help," she shouted, breathless. The receptionist, looking worn out, didn't even raise her head. "You need to fill out the form, ma'am." "I'll do it after." "He's burning up and can't breathe." A nurse came over, quickly checked the boy, and rushed him inside. Laura stayed in the lobby, hands shaking, heart racing. Her mind spun. Medicine, hospital bills, treatment, money, money. She opened her purse, rummaged through her pockets, searched for her wallet. She knew she didn't have enough, not even for a private exam. And that old fear returned. The same one from years ago, when she couldn't afford the medicine. Minutes later, the doctor appeared. "It's a respiratory infection," he said calmly. "We'll need to admit him for a few days." "And how much will that cost?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The hospitalization, exams, and antibiotics will total around 15,000. Laura's knees weakened. 15,000, nearly half a year of her salary. "Doctor, I don't have that right now. We can arrange a payment plan, but he needs treatment immediately." She looked through the observation window at her son. He was sleeping, an IV in his arm. "Do whatever it takes," she said, voice shaking. "I'll find a way later." The doctor nodded and went back inside. Laura sank into a chair, exhausted. Time crawled. When she went to the front desk to try leaving some paperwork, the receptionist said something that made her stop in her tracks. "Ms. Laura Ferreira?" "Yes?" "You can relax. The hospitalization and all expenses have already been covered." She frowned. "What do you mean, covered?" "Payment was made in advance. It's in the system." "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, ma'am. It was a direct transfer." "But by who?" The woman typed a few keys, glanced at the screen, and replied, "It says here, a gentleman named Eduardo Monteiro." Laura froze. The world seemed to spin backward. For a moment, she thought she hadn't heard right. The name repeated in her mind, echoing like a hammer striking metal. He paid for everything," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything," the receptionist replied, "and he left a message. Would you like me to read it?" Laura nodded slowly. The woman read from the monitor, "So that no night of fear ever repeats again. E.M." Tears filled Laura's eyes, not from relief, but from confusion, anger, and pain. She grabbed her bag and rushed out of the hospital, almost running. The road to the market felt longer than ever. Each step was fueled by a storm of feelings she couldn't name. When she arrived, the freshly painted facade still gleamed. She walked in without a word, cutting through the aisles until she reached the back where the final work was being done. Eduardo was there, talking with one of the engineers. He turned as he heard her footsteps. One look was enough. He knew she'd found out. "Laura, why did you do it?" she asked, eyes glistening. Because I couldn't let him suffer. Couldn't let him suffer or couldn't stand your guilt any longer? Her tone wasn't shouting. It was pure pain. Eduardo tried to step closer, but she stepped back. You don't understand, he began. Oh, I do, she interrupted. You can't stand silence. You need to feel useful to bury what you did. That's not it. I just wanted to help. Without asking me. Without giving me a choice. Again. That last word cut through the air like a blade. Again. The same mistake. The same attempt to fix what no longer belonged to him. Eduardo lowered his head. I made a mistake, trying to make things right. No, Eduardo. You made a mistake because you still believe money heals wounds. She took a deep breath, and for an instant her eyes softened. Gabriel's going to be fine, she said, and I'm grateful for that. But it's not the money that hurts me. It's how you did it. How? Yes. She moved closer. You did everything behind my back, as if I couldn't take care of my own son. He swallowed hard. I just didn't want to expose you, and you ended up stripping me again, she said firmly, of my strength, my independence, my peace. The silence that followed was heavy, full of truths neither dared to speak. Eduardo looked away. I don't know what to do anymore. Then for once, don't do anything, she said. Just let time speak. Laura turned and began walking toward the exit. But before leaving, she stopped and said, if you really want to make things right, do it for him, not for me. He still needs a father, even if he can't call you that yet. Eduardo's whole body trembled. He watched her leave, her loose hair swaying in the wind, until she disappeared between the cars. Later that afternoon, he went back to the hospital. Laura was sitting beside Gabriel's bed. When she saw him, she didn't stand up, but she didn't ask him to leave either. He approached quietly. The boy was asleep, his face calmer. Eduardo looked at him, a knot tightening in his throat. He looks just like me when I was little, he said softly. Laura replied without looking away from her son. I just hope he only looks like you. Eduardo smiled faintly. He's strong, got that from you. And stubborn, got that from you. A small silence settled between them. There was no reconciliation, only the beginning of something new. Respect. Eduardo placed an envelope on the bedside table. What's that? She asked. The final renovation report. Everything's under the company's name, not mine. You've been officially appointed as general manager. Laura looked at the envelope, hesitant. I didn't ask for that. I know, but you deserve it. And now it's official. She didn't answer. She simply held Gabriel's hand and whispered, he'll wake up soon. Eduardo stood, glancing at his son, then at her. I won't get in your way anymore. I just want you to know I still believe in new beginnings. Laura kept her gaze fixed on the boy, but said, then start by believing that forgiveness also needs silence. He nodded and left, his heart aching, but lighter than it had been in years. From the hallway, he looked back one last time, mother and son together, safe, strong. And he understood that perhaps the greatest kind of love is the one that learns to stay outside. But fate still had one final turn left, the gesture he would leave behind before disappearing, the one that would change everything. 2 days later, the sun returned. The sky, finally clear, felt like a gift after so many storms. At the hospital, Gabriel was awake, his cheeks no longer pale. Laura held his hand, and for the first time in a long while, she managed to smile for real. Mom, can I go home today? He asked eagerly. If the doctor says yes. And the man who paid for everything, is he coming to see us? Laura swallowed hard. It took her a moment to answer. I don't think so, son. Sometimes people help, and then they just keep walking. But why? Because some people fix things in silence. Gabriel thought for a few seconds, then nodded. He didn't fully understand, but deep down he was beginning to feel there was something different about that man. That same morning, a few miles away, Eduardo walked through the land of the old house, the place where everything had begun and ended. The wind blew softly, and the guava sapling, now with fresh green leaves, stood firm. He knelt, touched the soil, and stayed there, watching the living earth. From his pocket, he pulled a yellowed envelope with Laura's name written by hand. Inside was a simple letter and a few folded documents. He signed the last page, took a deep breath and left the envelope on the porch step. Then he took one last look at the house, that blend of memory and regret, and walked back to his car. As he drove, sunlight hit the windshield, forcing him to squint. But there was a peace he had never known before. It wasn't joy, it was relief. The kind of relief that only comes when someone finally understands that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about maturity. That afternoon, Laura and Gabriel came home. She opened the door and immediately noticed the envelope on the doorstep. She recognized the handwriting at once. Her heart began to race. She sat on the couch and opened it. Inside, a note. Laura, it took me years to understand that some wounds aren't healed with apologies, but with actions. The market is now yours. Officially. The profits, the decisions, all in your name. I'm not leaving out of weakness, but because I've learned that love, when it fails too much, needs to make room for those who stayed. Tell Gabriel, I never wanted to be a hero. I only wanted to be a better man than the one you both once knew. Thank you for showing me what truly matters, even without meaning to. Eduardo. The tears came before she even finished reading. Inside the envelope was also a formal document. The transfer of 50% of Recomeso S.A. Shares to the names Laura Ferreira and Gabriel Montero Ferreira. Laura covered her mouth, disbelief trembling through her voice. No, he didn't really do this, she whispered. Gabriel came closer, curious. What is it, Mom? Nothing, my love. She smiled through the tears. It's just that sometimes destiny finds a way to return what life once took away. The boy looked at the envelope. Is he coming back? Laura took a deep breath. I don't know. But what he left here, it's enough that we'll never have to go without again. She stood, walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The guava tree was there, growing quietly. The wind moved its leaves as if waving from afar, and for a moment Laura felt as though Eduardo was there too, watching. Meanwhile, miles away, Eduardo parked his car on a rural road. From the glove compartment, he took out a smaller envelope, the second copy of the letter. He opened it and read it one last time. His eyes welled up, but his face remained calm. He pulled out his phone, opened his gallery, and looked at an old photo. Him, Laura and baby Gabriel, smiling in front of the house that now belonged to them. He smiled too, this time without pain. The phone rang. It was Marcelo, the lawyer. Are you sure about this, Eduardo? You're giving up a lot. No, Marcelo. He looked out toward the horizon. I'm making space for something new to grow. And where will you go now? I don't know. Maybe somewhere the past won't recognize me. He hung up and stayed there, watching the sunset. The colors of the sky shifted slowly, gold, orange, red, as if the whole world was saying goodbye to an old guilt. That night, Laura sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in her hands. The cold wind blew gently, and the chirping of crickets was the only sound. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Eduardo, not for the money, but for finally learning to listen." Gabriel appeared at the door holding a notebook. "Mom, look what I drew." It was a tree with 3 hearts hanging from its branches, one for her, one for him, and a smaller one in the middle. Below it the boy had written, "Family Recomeso." Laura hugged him tightly, her chest filling with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That story didn't end with forgiveness or reunion. It ended with understanding. And sometimes that's stronger than love itself. She looked once more at the guava tree outside. It swayed gently now, bathed in moonlight, and she knew Eduardo hadn't been trying to redeem himself. He'd been trying to plant what he never knew how to grow, roots. In another city, in a modest hotel room, Eduardo gazed at the same sky through the window. The reflection of the moon mingled with the soft smile on his face. He closed his eyes and whispered, "What was broken has finally bloomed." And the wind, gliding through the night, seemed to carry his words to that distant yard, where a small tree grew silently, guarding within it the symbol of a new beginning. Because sometimes true love isn't the one that stays. It's the one that knows when to leave in peace. Time passed slowly, as if fate wanted each new day to taste like healing. 3 months had gone by since the last time Laura had seen Eduardo. Life was finding its rhythm again. Gabriel was back in school, his health restored, and the market was thriving under new management. Sales were up, the employees were happier, and the name Recomeço Mercantil finally meant something real. Still, sometimes Laura looked out the window, half expecting to see that black car parked by the road, just for a moment, but it never appeared again. It seemed to have vanished along with the last storm. Then, on a Monday morning, the mailman stopped in front of the house. He carried a thick, sealed envelope addressed in firm handwriting, "To Laura Ferreira Montero." Her heart sped up. She opened it carefully and saw the letterhead of a law firm. Inside were a letter and a folder filled with official documents. The handwritten letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means time has done what I couldn't do in life. Find the courage to leave everything where it truly belongs. Laura, I've registered in the notary that half of my company, the one that was born after I left, now belongs to our children. Their names were written in the contract, with all rights guaranteed. It wasn't inheritance, it was restitution. And it wasn't goodbye either. It was a new beginning, even if on different roads. Take care of them the way you always have, and if one day Gabriel wants to know who I was, tell him I was a man who learned to love too late, but still in time to do what's right." Eduardo Laura stood still, eyes filled with tears, hands trembling over the paper. He really did this," she whispered. Inside the folder, the documents confirmed it. 50% of Recomeço S.A. shares had been transferred to Gabriel Montero Ferreira and Luisa Montero Ferreira, the younger daughter who had been born shortly before the separation, the one Eduardo never got to meet. The ground seemed to vanish beneath Laura's feet. He had remembered both of them, not just Gabriel, Luisa too, the baby he had never held in his arms. That afternoon, she went to the market with the documents in her hands. The employees greeted her with smiles and congratulations. But Laura didn't feel powerful. She felt grateful. Grateful because at last she understood the meaning of restitution. She gathered the workers together in the hall and spoke, her voice trembling. "This place isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to my family, and to all of you." "How so?" asked one of the employees. "We're going to create a workers' fund. A portion of the profits will be shared among everyone." "He taught me that wealth without sharing is just disguised debt." The hall fell silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause. Sincere, strong, emotional. Laura smiled, wiped her tears, and looked up at the ceiling, as if speaking to someone who could hear her. "Thank you, Eduardo," she whispered softly, "for finally understanding what it means to be truly rich." That same day, Laura decided to visit a place she had avoided for years. The cemetery where Eduardo's parents were buried. She brought simple flowers, white chrysanthemums. Gabriel insisted on going with her. They arrived in the late afternoon. The sky was painted orange, and the breeze carried the gentle scent of damp earth. As they approached the grave, Laura noticed something new. Beside the old tombstone was a small bronze plaque, freshly placed. It read, "Eduardo Montero, 1979-2025. Now I can rest, because what I broke is whole again." Laura dropped to her knees, stunned. She hadn't known he was gone. No one had told her. The world seemed to stop. Gabriel held her arm, confused. "Mom, what is it?" It took her a moment to answer. "He's gone, my love. Forever?" She took a deep breath, looking toward the sky. No one is gone forever when they leave roots behind. The two of them stayed silent for a few minutes. Laura laid the flowers on the grave and opened her purse. Inside was a small jar filled with soil from their home, the same soil where the guava tree was growing. She poured a handful beside the plaque. "Now it's right," she murmured. "Everything that was his has returned to the earth it belonged to." On the way home, the road looked different. The sun was setting behind the hills, and the wind stirred the leaves along the roadside. Gabriel stared out the window, thoughtful. "Mom, he left happy, didn't he?" Laura smiled, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yes, because he finally made peace with himself. When they arrived, the yard greeted them with the sweet scent of the guava tree in bloom. Tiny fruits had begun to appear among the green leaves. Laura stopped in front of the tree, brushed her hand over the blossoms and whispered, "He kept his promise." It lived. Gabriel pressed his notebook against the trunk and wrote with the tip of his pencil, "Eduardo Monteiro, the man who learned to plant again." Weeks later, an anonymous envelope arrived at the market. Inside was only a photograph, Eduardo, wearing a simple shirt, leaning over a counter, smiling at a child who was clearly Gabriel, taken on one of those days when the boy had helped him plant the sapling. On the back of the photo, a single sentence, almost a confession. "Sometimes love has to disappear so it can bloom in the hearts of those who stay." Laura held the photo for a long time, then placed it in a simple frame and hung it on the office wall. Just below it, she wrote by hand a phrase that became the new company's motto, "Recomeço," because even mistakes can bear fruit. Final scene. The backyard at dusk. The wind moving through the guava tree's leaves, birds singing, Gabriel and Luisa playing in the soil, and Laura watching from the porch, her face serene, her gaze calm. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, felt something different, true peace. The imaginary camera slowly pulled away, showing the tree growing beneath the golden light of the sunset, and a final voiceover filled the air. Some loves don't end with kisses or reunions. They end with gestures, gestures that heal the past, turn pain into seed and regret into roots. Because the real happy ending is the one that doesn't need applause, only silence. Fade out, dark screen, sound of the wind. Then the title slowly appears, Recomeço. There are stories that never truly end. They simply change form, becoming memory, lesson, or seed. Eduardo once believed money could buy forgiveness. But he learned, too late, that some debts can only be paid with genuine remorse. And remorse isn't saying, "I'm sorry." It's changing the way you live. He spent half his life trying to conquer the world, and the other half trying to mend what he had broken. And only when he stopped trying to be a hero did he finally become human. Life has a curious way of teaching us. Sometimes it takes everything away, not to punish you, but to make you understand the value of what can't be bought. And when you finally see that, what once felt like guilt turns into purpose. Eduardo's gesture was never about wealth. It was about restitution, about recognizing that love and pride can't live in the same house. One builds, the other destroys. And when love wins, even in silence, the whole world seems to breathe differently. Laura learned how to live alone, but she also learned something greater, that forgiving isn't about forgetting what was done to you. It's about no longer letting it keep hurting you. And that's what she did. She didn't forget. She overcame. Gabriel grew up knowing his father had failed, but also that mistakes can teach. And that's the most powerful inheritance anyone can leave behind, the courage to change one's own destiny. The guava tree in the backyard became a symbol of that. It was born small, fragile, almost dead, but over time it bloomed, because even the most wounded soil can bear fruit again if someone has the courage to care for it. That's what time does to those who learn. It turns pain into wisdom, guilt into gratitude, and silence into peace. If you look around right now, you might find someone like Eduardo, trying to fix what they once broke, or someone like Laura, learning to begin again after loss. Or maybe you're like Gabriel, trying to understand why the people we love sometimes have to leave in order to come back changed. But the truth is simple. Life is a cycle of new beginnings. We make mistakes, we fall, we learn, and we plant again. And those who have the courage to replant, even with hands dirty from regret, are already closer to being free. The kind of wealth that truly matters doesn't depend on a bank account. It's measured in gestures, in glances, in silent forgiveness. Because the real luxury is ending the day knowing you did the right thing, even if no one saw it. Eduardo left without applause. No perfect movie ending. But his legacy stayed rooted in the soil, in the company, in the memory of those who learned from his mistakes. And that's what makes a story eternal, when it becomes a lesson for those who remain. In the end, maybe that's what we're all searching for. A way to leave the world a little more whole than we found it. A way to make peace with the past. A way to start over without needing to go back. Because whoever learns to say goodbye with love has already understood the true meaning of staying. Some gestures mean more than forgiveness. They mean the chance to begin again.